An internal memo from the German police leaked to the newspaper Freiheit suggests that police officers who are members of the Alternative für Deutschland or Alternative for Germany party may face disciplinary consequences. This includes being fired from their job, all for the crime of being affiliated with one of the largest parties in Germany. Now, the memo is citing so-called concerns about loyalty to the Constitution for employees working in a party classified as definitely right-wing extremists. Now, I find it odd, and I don't know about you, but this sort of campaign against so-called extremists or conservatives who just happen to have traditional leanings as extremists has been happening here in the US, it has happened in Canada, in the UK, and all over the European Union. It is almost as if the parties of big government, who have been moving ever closer towards a socialist style of governance, are now hell-bent on crushing their political opponents, no longer through the ballot box, but through fear and intimidation. The authoritarianism of these types of people, who are now currently occupying positions of authority in governments like in Germany, have become unmasked following their grossly incompetent rule of their countries during the pandemic. And the shift towards a more authoritarian style of government via different tools, including mass censorship of their citizens, has been happening all over Western civilizations now. And this is not happening as a small trickle, but as a torrent that no one who is honest with themselves can possibly miss. And I should also point out, I cannot think of one time in human history where a government instituted mass censorship of the population and were in fact the good guys. It always seems to be the opposite. Governments who participate in censorship, they just seem to be doing evil things to their people, time and time again. And it always starts with the stripping of personal freedoms, the abuse of power, the concealment of truth through censorship, and the stifling of progress. And this always seems to end towards some kind of mass incarceration, torture, and eventually murder of people who do not bow down to their masters. Now, this brings me nicely back to our story at hand. The German government is continuing to work overtime to try and de-legitimize the AfD. They've been unable to wipe out this growing political group at the ballot box, even as they have tried to demonize and even ban the party. And of course, there's the usual claims of racism and now even Nazism to try and describe this party as they attempt to try to wipe them out. So to discuss this story further, I'm going to pull up an article from the news website Remix News. They write, "Will the German police really fire all of its AfD members?" According to a report from a German newspaper published yesterday, all officers are being threatened with dismissal for their membership in the Alternative for Germany. However, it remains unclear whether the police will actually proceed with such dismissals. The internal memo linked to Freiheit states that employees working for the police in, quote, a party classified as definitely right-wing extremist brought up questions of loyalty to the Constitution. The internal memo is now threatening disciplinary consequences, including dismissal, if police are found to be members of the party. A professor of constitutional law in Oldenburg, who is critical of the stance of the federal police, wrote that if that is true, it is a real scandal. Of course, the basic law guarantees that civil servants can be members of a party that is not banned. That is why you can't fire a civil servant just because they're members of the AfD. That also applies to membership in the SPD, the CDU, and other parties that are not banned. Now, the paper goes on to write that in essence, threatening dismissal from the police simply because they are AfD members appears to be illegal under the German Constitution. But when has that ever stopped authoritarians, right? Now, Remix also points out that while German politicians are in fact working towards banning the party, such an action could be years away if it ever comes to pass at all. The AfD is currently polling at 22% of the population and is the second most popular party in the country. In March of last year, the new police commissioner, Uli Gotzt, stated that the membership in the AfD was, quote, highly problematic due to racist and right-wing extremist views. He was quoted as saying, "I think it is highly problematic if police employees are members of the AfD or support the party in other ways." In another report on AfD members in the police in the state of Thuringia, where the AfD is highly popular, it was revealed that there are AfD members in the police force, but only in the high single digits. It did not mention if any disciplinary proceedings are being brought against these officers. However, in one case, an AfD member was working for the Federal Intelligence Service, or the BND. He also stood for the AfD in various elections, and he was then banned from the premises of the BND. Now, based on the number of police officers in Thuringia, there are highly unlikely to be many AfD members in the police force in all of Germany. In part, threats such as the one of the internal memo, coupled with the statements by top law enforcement officials, means that membership of the AfD appears to be a career killer for German police officers, and according to internal documents, could very well mean the end of employment entirely. Now, the government here is doing all of this instead of actually dealing with the core issues that made the Alternative für Deutschland even possible. Ever since that idiot, that bonehead, Angela Merkel, who brought in over 1 million Syrians into her country back in 2015, which, by the way, then led to mass gang rapes of women in Germany later that year, the outcry of Germany and her citizens has been growing in leaps and in bounds. But of course, these governments, they just ignored their citizens. The ruling class couldn't be bothered with the concerns of their stupid citizens. Man, that sounds familiar to here in the United States. The AfD is hated, my friends, in large part because they stand in direct opposition to immigration of those of Islamic religion. They view this ideology as incompatible with their own. And they are also staunchly opposed to the climate hysteria that led to the Green Deal, something which many Germans view as deeply damaging to their country. And see, here is the irony. The AfD would be nothing more than a fringe group had not the old traditional center-right Christian Democratic Union, or the CDU, who's supposed to be the conservatives in the country, ignore the cries of their party members, and instead, back in 2015, moved to adopt a relatively open stance on immigration. This approach, particularly during the 2015 refugee crisis, created the very political vacuum that the AfD would then exploit. The AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, capitalized on growing public anxiety about this immigration problem. The party would go on to advocate for strict border controls. They wanted huge reductions in immigration and increased deportations. It took a strong stance against what it calls the Islamification of German society, which is indeed happening today. And none of these stances on their face, my friends, is a bad thing. We have seen just how evil and dark the deeds have been for countries who have fallen prey to Islamification of their culture. All you need to do is look at Iran if you want to see what sort of hell awaits people if you reside in a country that is stupid enough to allow the Islamification to happen. Now, too late, the Christian Democratic Union tried to rebrand itself, the old centrist right party, in response to the AfD's growing popularity. The party, for example, is now calling for changes to its platform, specifying that Sharia does not belong to Germany, and emphasizing the need for immigrants to adopt German guiding culture. However, the shift is seen as too little and too late by many voters in Germany, who have already turned to the Alternative für Deutschland for aid. The public knows that the CDU is doing what they're doing now, not because they genuinely believe in the issue, but rather are simply trying to use it as a wedge issue to try and split the vote away from the AfD, which then takes me back to the attempts to simply ban the party. The more that this happens, the more that the German government tries to curb stomp their own citizens, the more that they will anger, the more that they will fuel anger against themselves. Just like here in the US, in Canada, and likely the fury that is brewing in the UK, the mistake of trying to force people to adopt ideologies that they do not want will inevitably lead to a backlash, a storm that they cannot weather. These leftists, these socialists, and everything in between are going to find themselves unprepared to weather the storm if they don't learn the lesson now. And likely it's simply too late. And in the case of Germany, well, the price to pay may come sooner than anticipated. You see, elections are coming soon. February 23rd of this year, there will be a snap election. It was called earlier than originally planned due to the collapse of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's coalition government in late 2024. And what is interesting about this election is all 630 seats will be up for election, with 316 are needed for a majority. Now, what happens next is anyone's guess, but naturally we'll be keeping an eye on it as the situation continues to develop. From the To Be Frank show, I am Adrian. Thanks for watching, my friends. I'll see you all in the next video.